Hello there, coming from Stones Corner in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. My name is Scott Mercer. This is a podcast called Gimme Empathy, where I talk to the people in my world, whether I've known them for years or whether they're new to me. And my guest this episode is someone who is pretty new to me. My guest is Annette Guilfoyle. Now, I met Annette at a fundraiser gig for Girls Rock Brisbane a few months ago that was on at Backbone. I was introduced to her through Lisa Kundi, who you may know from episode 8 of this podcast. And much like when I first met Lisa, I knew very quickly that Annette was a person who had had a very interesting life and that I want to talk to her on a microphone about it. So Annette works in live sound. She got her start as a front of house engineer, meaning the music that the audience at a gig hears. And she since then moved on to specialize in monitor sound, which means the sound that the musicians on stage actually hear, which can be very different to how it sounds out front to the punters. Annette has worked with artists including Paul Weller, Spiritualized, Goldfrapp, The Go-Betweens, The Editors, Marina and the Diamonds, Taylor Swift, Blondie, and her current gig touring the world with Florence and the Machine. It was only because Florence was touring in Australia that I actually got to talk to Annette, because she usually resides in England. I should also mention that Annette rode her bicycle through pouring rain to get to the recording of this podcast. So thank you very much for that, Annette. And without further ado, here is episode 52 of Gimme Empathy with Annette Guilfoyle. So is dealing with microphones, like as a live sound engineer, at this point, is that still something you have to do, or is that someone lower on the totem pole?
Oh, in my dreams, it would hopefully be someone else. At the moment, in the situation that I'm working, I have a monitor tech, a stage tech, so he looks after all the microphones, setting them up on stage. So yes, he does that. However, in terms of the handheld microphone for the main singer, I will sort of turn that on, get it powered up, check the batteries and check it.
So the lead singer at the moment is Florence Welch from
Yes.
Florence and the Machine, who we're working with. Does she have a good mic technique? Is she good with mics?
Yeah, she's got an amazing voice. I do not have to worry about level whatsoever. In fact, when I first went into rehearsals, I sort of had it set for someone pretty full on. I'd previously worked with Marina from Marina and the Diamonds, and she's got a very strong voice, so I'd sort of set it based on her because we were using the same type of mic. And Florence came in and it was at least 3 or 4 dB louder.
Wow.
So I had to quickly turn the gain down.
Where does that, because Florence is not, she's a pretty small person, right? Like smaller than she might appear on stage, one of those kind of people?
She is, everyone thinks she's tall, but she's very slim. But she's basically, without shoes, she's my height. So me in sneakers, I can set the mic up to my height and she's that height. No one believes it. They always go and change it and set it taller, and I'm like, no.
So do you know, and there've been a few pretty famous singers who are much shorter in person than people might expect. Where does that sound come from?
Oh, I don't know how. I think she's done some training, so it would be from the diaphragm, from breathing, because as you probably would have seen her, she runs constantly during the show, and I do not hear her out of breath on that microphone. And I will, prior to the show, I will walk the arena floor or the outdoor amphitheatre and talking constantly in the microphone, listening for dropouts in her ears and listening for, if the signal's strong enough so she's not getting too much interference or delay from the front of house speakers. So I'm listening for that. And I'm walking around where she's running around and I'm out of breath and I'm not unfit. So, yeah, I guess training and natural ability, I guess.
What kind of mic does she use?
We've got her on a Sennheiser, one of the new digital handheld Series 6000. The capsule is called an MD9235, which is basically a dynamic capsule. It works a treat for her. It can take the sound pressure levels that she gives us. And it's just a very solid sounding, very present sounding microphone. I'd used it previously, or the analog version previously, and she'd used the analog version previously in the last album tour, and I'd seen them play on that tour at Coachella, and myself and my front of house engineer at the time asked their crew what was she using because it sounded so good, which is why we sort of kept on. We changed our singer to that microphone and then kept on with that for her.
So that's a decision you make, what microphones are being
Yes,
used?
so when I'm sort of working for a band or get brought in, unless they've got a deal with someone or they've got a personal preference, usually it's a conversation between myself doing monitors and the front of house engineer as to what microphones we use, which is what the case was with Florence. The front of house engineer, I'd never met him before. He was an American guy, very, very experienced, had worked with Rush, Def Leppard, loads of big bands, Grammy award-winning kind of guy. But he was like, well, what do you want to use, Annette? Just say what you want. These are the ones I'd like to use for certain instruments. And I said, well, this is what I'd like to use for vocals, and he went with that.
So you're has the Florence tour just finished now?
No, we've got till September this year.
Oh my God. I was is the Australian leg.
Yes, that leg's finished. So we've got a month off now, and we'll be starting a European tour in March.
How are the Australian shows?
Absolutely fantastic. All sold out. I mean, Day on the Green, we all got there, and including the band and her, and just went 20,000 people because we had no idea. You know, we had delay towers of speakers for ages up the field, and I was just looking, going, "This is massive." It was incredible, and they were blown away. And they were all amazing shows. Yeah, great response, great audience response. She seemed really happy on stage. She seemed to be really loving it.
How big is the crew and the band altogether?
There's with her and the band, it's a 9-piece on stage. Then you've got core crew, and by that I mean, front of house engineer, monitor engineer, lighting designer. You've got your tour managers, your production managers, production assistants, and there might be people travelling with you as well, like my stage tech, who's my monitor tech, and he also looks after all the RF, the wireless systems. He's very good, so we would like him to come everywhere, so he's become part of the core crew, like all the backline guys as well. And then you have all the other crew that work for like the PA companies, the lighting companies, the video companies. Our video director obviously comes with us. I'm forgetting all the components. There's so many people, so I don't know a total, but I'd say around 40 to 50.
Wow.
And that's not the hugest crew. So, but it is a biggish show. But
I just kind of have no perspective on this because, like, the most touring, like I've done, I've only been in tiny bands. It's just, 5 of us in a car, like not even a van.
Yeah.
And, like, how did at what point, like in your career, did you start stepping up to these bigger acts?
Probably when I moved to England. I was doing this in Melbourne is where I started doing this, and I was doing the same thing, working for little bands, driving our cars. If we were lucky, we'd hire a car. I worked for a band, the Bluegrassy Knolls, so we did a lot of theatre touring in minivans, did Woodford Folk Festival, that sort of stuff. And we toured overseas with that band. But it wasn't until I moved to the UK and I started working for PA companies, so I'd go out as the tech, like the monitor tech, with the touring artist. And it was through that I got asked to do Paul Weller from The Jam. So I got asked to tech that, and everyone was like, everyone at the company had gone, "Oh no, don't do that, Annette, it's really rough." And I was like, well, it's my turn, and I did it. And Paul liked me and asked me to take over monitors the following year.
Well, I should probably go back. So did you grow up in Melbourne?
No, I grew up in Brisbane.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
When you were like a teenager or something, like what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an architect.
Ah.
I'm actually a town planner, if we go into that detail. That was what I was by the time I got to high school, I knew I was going to go to university. I was really into technical drawing. I loved architecture. I wanted to be an architect. So I went to QIT, did a Bachelor of Applied Science in the Built Environment, which had a common first year between architecture, industrial design, landscape planning and town planning. And at the end of the first year, you had to sort of go into one of the strands. They basically told us there were too many architects and choose something else. And by which stage I'd sort of really sort of fallen in love with town planning. So I went into the landscape and planning strand and did that. And then did a graduate diploma in urban and regional planning.
What kind of music were you into when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, well, my first single was Skippy the Bush Kangaroo.
Wow.
Which obviously my mum would have bought for me. But I remember the first single I asked for to be bought for me was Kiss, I Was Made for Lovin' You. And I kind of, as usual with kids, I was listening to whatever my bigger brothers were listening to, which was AC/DC, The Angels, and they then ended up going very heavy metal. And by which stage I was listening to the radio and Countdown and getting into poppy stuff. I went to see Duran Duran when I was 14. The Church I liked really early on. That was the first band I actually went to see. And it was probably that side of things that I was getting more into. I don't know how I discovered Triple Z, but I discovered that because I just got bored of the radio stations like 4IP, I think it was back then. So I was sort of playing with the dials and found more interesting music that I like listening to. So
was that when Triple Z was still at UQ?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
did you get involved in the station?
Not really. Not really at all. I had a friend who was more involved with it later, and she'd done some shifts work as a presenter, sort of late night. So we'd go down with her and help her play records. So that was as much as it was. I was very much a hanger-oner in that sort of sense.
Okay, yeah. So part of like the wider Z circle, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I used to. I didn't really have it. It was weird when I was growing up because none of my friends were into that sort of thing. It's something I sort of got into myself. Even my brothers weren't into it. I was just kind of searching for this music that interested me, and that was through listening to Triple Z that I found stuff that I liked.
So what kind of stuff, like a bit further away from Kiss and all that, did you find?
Yeah, well,
Z?
for things like, I was going, because I didn't have a lot of friends to go out with who wanted to see that sort of thing. So I'd drive, by the time I got to 17 and got my license, I'd drive and see Ups and Downs or Hoodoo Gurus myself up at Deception Bay and things like that, because that was the only way I was going to see them because I didn't know anyone else who was into that sort of music at the time. And it was only through meeting people through my part-time job at Kentucky Fried Chicken that I met people in the band scene, so to speak. And so I finally found like-minded people, if you see what I mean. Because even at university, all my classmates were very preppy from private schools. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but it was very, that sort of scene, collars up, boat shoes, that sort of style.
Did you go out to smaller local gigs around Brisbane as well?
Yes, I started to when I sort of got friends in that area. But before that, I would often go into the Triple Z market days myself. I remember at one point seeing the Queensland Police clear the audience on a market day, back when the Queensland Police was like that. So that was kind of a bit startling and frightening, seeing that sort of firsthand.
Yeah, like what was that? These are the legends, that I hear about and read about. But like, what was it like to be there?
Shock. It was just a shock. I was in shock. I mean, it was at the tail end of it because I remember when I was still trying to find my identity, so to speak, being confused about what to wear, trying to look different and everything. And I'd go out into town at night and I started to get the comments from the police, not full-on harassment, but you started to get the, stared at, a few comments made.
What would they say to you?
Oh, I don't really remember back then. I just remember just being aware that all of a sudden all the stuff that I'd heard, about Caxton Street and all that, and the police sort of invading the gigs and sort of starting to have a go at people really probably was true. So, like I said, I caught the tail end of it.
I read that, like, back in the 60s, patrolling police through the city, if they saw like a young man with a shirt not tucked in, like in a T-shirt or something, and he was out late at night, they would frog march him back to police headquarters and give him an iron shirt and force him to wear it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I could imagine that. Well, I think not too long after I'd started seeing a guy in a local band, and he was, paisley shirt, pointy boots, everything like that. He was in a car accident one night. His uncle was fairly high up in the task force.
Ah.
And so all the police were like, oh, such and such's nephew was in this accident. And they thought he was the clean-cut young man in the other car. So that everyone was kind of shocked when it was the long-haired lout in the other one.
How did you first start getting into, like, did you play music when you were young?
I wouldn't say I played music. There was always like an organ in our house because my dad used to play piano and organ, and I think he'd gotten fairly high in his grades for piano, but he basically did it for fun, and at someone's parties he might start playing. So there's always that there, and I just used to sit at the keyboard, and I'd pick out whatever popular song I liked at the time, but I never did it seriously. It was just something I liked doing. And I'd buy the music for whatever album. I know I bought some Duran Duran.
Like the sheet
music, to get the pictures. But also I'd sit there and, pick it out with one finger on the, in a very basic self-taught way.
But so you could read a bit of sheet music, though?
Yeah, I could I could read the basics of it, very, very basics. And it wasn't until later on that I decided, I'm going to be a drummer, and that was a bit later on, and that I had that phase.
So you went to uni to do architecture that became town planning?
Yes.
Did you actually get a job doing that when you graduated?
Yes, because my second degree was part-time, so I was working at a town planning firm in Brisbane. During that, we worked on such controversial things as the world's tallest building, which was proposed in Edward Street.
Oh, that never got up. I read about that recently because that was at the very tail end of the Bjelke-Petersen era, and it was like a really dodgy deal he'd like personally pushed through without any of the right planning and stuff.
We were the town planners on that, and I was like, I can't possibly work on this, and it's like, yes, you will. So had my sort of silent protest in the office and basically I was doing drawings and going and doing research and that while I was doing my graduate diploma. But then I moved on from that. I worked at another company, and I think it was around that time all the corruption stuff came out and the building industry went a bit bust, and Christopher Skase was the bad guy, and so the job I had kind of disappeared, and I was looking for another job, and I got to work on the Fraser Island inquiry. So, and some other people that I knew did as well. So I was the town planner on the inquiry, and what that involved was I just dealt with submissions to deal with land use and research. I also used to get together the itinerary for Tony Fitzgerald because he took over that inquiry. So I'd do his itinerary when he was going to Fraser Island about all the issues, and I'd have to talk to all the other departments, the environmental department, etc., about what things he should be looking at.
Was that part of the actual Fitzgerald inquiry that started in being about police corruption?
No, that had finished. My timeline around there is certainly very blurry and fuzzy in my memory, but that had finished, and because he'd done that, they appointed him to run the Fraser Island inquiry.
Right, okay.
So we basically prepared all the submissions. We dealt with all the submissions of people wrote in and went, I want to be able to subdivide my land. I'd look at all the zoning around that, the land titles, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed, all the environmental impacts. And although you were never allowed to put across your opinion, you could put in as much research supporting that, be it negative or positive. You basically had to give as much information as possible. And we'd sort the submissions into categories, and I think I reorganised my chapter from what they'd originally set out. I was a bit opinionated by that back then, and so I said, no, I need to do it this way. And they were happy with that. And then all our work that we generated became these sort of, printed, bound books, and then basically it went to a panel of professionals. So I think one of my lecturers from town planning, he was the town planner who assessed all those sort of aspects. So all my research and all that work went to him, and there were other senior professionals that helped work out the issues and what they should do. And obviously the end result was World Heritage listing.
Was that an outcome you were maybe hoping for?
Yes, being the big sort of semi-hippie greenie that I was at the time.
Did you personally work with Tony Fitzgerald?
No, I told them that how can I possibly write an itinerary for the man if I don't get allowed to go along myself, because I'd never been to Fraser Island either.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I kept trying that angle, but they wouldn't listen to me. No,
Oh.
So I stayed in the office.
And so at what point did you get into live sound?
It wasn't until I moved to Melbourne. So I'd done the Fraser Island inquiry, and that came to an end, and I was looking at jobs, and I had always been a little bit restless and trying to move on. And a job came up that I applied for, which was head of coastal management strategy for the Queensland coastline, which would have meant flying up and down the coastline, meeting with all the councils that constituted the coastline, working out a coastal management strategy. So I applied for that. I also applied for a few jobs interstate, but there was one in Melbourne I applied for, which was in the Dandenong Ranges for Sherbrooke Shire, and it was writing a new town planning scheme, and that covered a lot of the Dandenong Ranges, lots of conservation issues, lots of environmental issues. In the end, I got offered both. So, and I went, I want to move. I don't want to stay in Brisbane. So I moved to Melbourne. So I worked on that, and that was a contract as well. And by the time that it got extended and that was coming up, I decided I needed something more in life. And I'd done a 12-week live sound course at Sing Sing Studios in Melbourne. I had no idea what I was doing, but, I was still going out and seeing bands. I had friends who were in bands, partners in bands. So if I wasn't at work, I was doing something to do with bands or music.
What made you take that course?
I was just looking for something else. I'd also done a creative writing course because that was an interest, but the live sound thing, it was one of those things. I used to go to gigs and I go, why does that not sound very good tonight? It was one of those things that concerned me. I started questioning, but not playing an instrument. I didn't really understand the details of it. So I went, I'll go do a live sound course and see what that's about.
I can do better than this. I can make this sound better.
And I learned why it probably didn't sound very good, because there are so many factors that are out of your control as well. But so it was just an interest in being more involved in that.
And so after the course, you started getting a few gigs?
Well, after the course, my contract had finished, and I took over a friend's job at the Punters Club in Melbourne doing publicity, so putting up posters, doing the chalkboard, which then turned into putting together Form Guide magazine, which they used to release every month.
Is that like a street press thing?
It was like street press, but it was almost like the pub's fanzine. So it was the Punters Club, then they bought the Corner Hotel at that time, so the owner, Matt Everett, was a big supporter of live music and was very happy to put this publication out. Richard Moffat was the booker at the time, so he's done very well for himself and, totally into all sorts of music and a very, very objective person in terms of that. So it was his idea to do this form guide. And so in the end I started getting that together. So I'd organise interviews, organise writers who ended up being friends that I knew or people who had got in contact and wanted to write. And I'd do some writing, hand out CDs for reviews. I think Shock Records offered to distribute it, so it ended up being distributed around Australia every month for free. And so, yeah, that was kind of fun. So I was doing that, and at the 12-week, after the 12-week course had done, because I was involved with the pub as well, they said, we've got a band that we know that you could book gigs for and mix them as well. So I started doing that. I had no idea what I was doing, let's face it. And I was at this gig and this guy was mixing this other band and he sort of said to me, do you want to learn how to do this? And I went, yeah. And I just started following him around to every gig. He taught me how to run cables, how to, just from the ground up. And he's now one of my best friends. He owned a little PA. I started helping him set that up voluntarily until he was paying me to set it up and run it, and I was doing monitors. And, he's got installs at the corner, Northcote Social Club. He's been around the Melbourne scene for ages, mixes bands. But, yeah, he was great. He was fantastic. He gave me so much of his time and taught me so much.
Who is he?
Paul Martin.
Paul Martin.
He goes under the... Texas Audio is his company, but, people in Melbourne know him. He's a very generous person.
Is he still doing a lot of sound?
Yes, yeah. He's still around. He's very good at fixing everything as well.
Right. So what kind of bands were you doing sound for?
I started off working for a friend's band, a friend of a friend who sort of knew I'd done the live sound course. And he's like, oh, we're getting a band together. Come and do Mix Us. And it was a band called The Family. So it was in that hardcore sort of side of things. Not so hard as like Christ Bates and stuff like that, but in that era or that sort of genre of things. So I started off on that side of things as well as doing the demo nights at the Punters Club. So I'd mix that. And then I seemed to find myself mixing bands that had the non-traditional instruments, so to speak, be they various different types of string instruments and lots of girls' vocals and stuff like that. So I sort of moved over to that side of things.
Is it, this might be a really silly question, is it easier or harder to mix like a really loud hardcore band than like say a band that's maybe quieter but has sort of different instrumentation and is a bit odd in terms of arrangements?
It would depend on the situation it's in. If you're mixing the hardcore loud band in a very small room, in a very small PA that's underpowered, you're going to struggle even just to get the vocals over the top. Whereas with the other type of band, it might be easier because you're not sort of trying to make the PA do overwork, so to speak. So it depends, but the non-traditional one can be difficult in terms of placing those instruments. And again, it all depends about how you are getting the sound off them. Do they have pickups on them, or are they, relying on the microphones in the venue? That sort of thing. There are so many factors involved. The hardcore band could be very easy and very straightforward with a good sized PA. What
were some of the steepest learning curves you came up with when you first started?
Oh my goodness, every day. I guess I remember when I first got to work with the Bluegrassy Knoll. I'd worked with some of them in another project, and they were about to start touring their Buster Keaton show that they did. They'd written a soundtrack to a Buster Keaton silent film, and they got asked to perform it up at Woodford. And they were going to do a series of shows, and they said, do you want to come along and do sound for us? I think they'd done 1 week of it in Melbourne, and they got a local company who I work for to mix it, and I'd gone and seen it and thought it was fantastic. So the thing was, they also sat in front of the PA and played facing the screen, so that was an issue. So we went to Woodford. So here we are at Woodford Folk Festival. I've given up my job at the Punters Club to go on tour with the Bluegrassy Knoll. I've taken the step, and we're doing a festival. And as festivals go, there's very little change over time, and you're doing this very non-traditional setup. Folk in itself is a very non-traditional setup, but these guys are completely different. They're facing the opposite way. They're slightly in front of the PA, and I'm very green and very new, so that was a big learning curve, getting them up and running and getting it to work. And
was there ever like a catastrophic failure that happened?
There were not very good things. And if there is anything catastrophic, I think I've blanked it from my memory.
Oh, that's good.
But there's always stuff that happens, and there's stuff that happens now that you can be as prepared as you want to be. And stuff will always happen, and stuff will always go wrong.
Did you find, like when you were starting out, were there a lot of people who were like really like nice and were sort of mentoring and were keen to show you the ropes?
Yes, I've recently had to think about this because I've done basically a history, a bio for this organisation called Sound Girls, who are an American-based group and who do profiles of people. But anyway, so they've made me think about that recently, and I think I've been quite lucky because basically all the way along I've been surrounded by really supportive people and people who, well, gender was never an issue. I think there's only one instance I can think of it being absolutely blatantly the rudeness about it, and the band stood up for me. But other than that, I've been surrounded by people who want to impart knowledge, and I became friends with a group of sound engineers in Melbourne where everyone passed each other work, everyone could ring each other up and ask questions, and that happens today. So I've got a group of people that I've met over the years. I know, if I'm having trouble with a certain console, I can ring this person up because they're very good at it, and generally most people are like that, and most companies I've worked for have been fantastic.
What happened with the one time where there was
I think it was north of Sydney somewhere. I was with what were they then? The Silver Surfers. And this guy was just being really rude to me because I'd sort of gone up to the console, put my gear down. I think I was just having a look, and he just started yelling at me.
So he was the house engineer?
He was the house engineer.
Right.
I mean, I hadn't really done anything. I wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. I wasn't taking over his space. I was waiting for him to, come and let me proceed. And I think by the end of the night, the band had witnessed a few of those things, and he was just being very belligerent with me. But I sort of got on with it because what can you do? You've got a gig to do. So I'm working for the band, so you've got to do that and get it up and running, and irrespective of what his behaviour's like. And I think at the end of the night, I think as we left, the band were just shouting abuse at him, basically.
There seems, I think there's kind of a whole generation of dudes who are by now a bit older who just seem to, you come across them on like low-level tours, and it seems like they've been in little bars doing live sound for a long time.
Yeah.
And they just seem to hate everything about their job. Like they hate the bands, like they hate having to do things for you. They hate having questions asked. I don't know why they're there, but it's a very specific type of dude.
I know what it's like, but I think you'll find that in most jobs. If somebody stays in the same job but actually really doesn't like it and doesn't actually want to make the effort to change.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you mean.
And I imagine it must be frustrating, like having constant, green bands come in asking the same questions, saying, oh, my DI isn't working. Can I get more of me in the fallback? I imagine it must be a bit maddening on some level.
Yes, it would be, but you've got to look at where you're working. Of course, that's going to happen. And if you're not happy to impart knowledge and help people, then don't do it.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing with this, which I'm finding now. I'm always learning still, and I'm always learning off people. And if I can always help someone, I will, because people have helped me over the years. And it makes for a much nicer environment. And why wouldn't you want to work in a nice environment? So,
having said that, what is the most annoying question you get asked by a band as an engineer?
Oh, well, as a monitor engineer, when you ask them what would you like in your monitors, they say a bit of everything. It is a little bit annoying, but you narrow that down and you filter that. I mean, I use my experience to filter that into what you actually really need, because some people just don't know what to ask for, and I've got to realise that.
Was that the last time you were actually like a resident house engineer at venues, when you were in Melbourne?
Yes. I was really only resident at the Punters Club on the Monday nights. Back then, which is different to now, really were no house engineers. So every band had to bring an engineer. So we were, I was doing gigs for $30, but I might do 3 of them a night, for different bands, because everyone had to bring someone.
It is actually, I think it is still a bit like that in Sydney and Melbourne. And the first time I went on tour, I was really confused that they said we had to bring our own engineer, because in Brisbane, it's almost all house engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd get to the point where, so there'd be Sydney bands coming down, so I'd get phone calls, can you come and mix this at this gig? And so that's where, I started to meet, you'd meet a lot of people, and like I said, other engineers say, I can't do it, but such and such can do it. So there was a lot of work around there, and it wasn't huge, it wasn't huge paying work, but I was working 7 nights a week, and then during the day I had a van which my friend Paul had kitted out for me. We'd lined it with wood, and he also helped me buy it. He was just fantastic, and I used to go and take little vocal PAs out to the universities and do lunchtime gigs as well for smaller companies. So it was pretty constant, the work.
And were you making a living off it?
Not quite, no. No, not a huge living. Every now and again I'd have to get, I was on the dole, but I wasn't claiming it all the time. It was only when I wasn't earning enough money. So. And
had you kind of given up on the town planning?
Yeah, by that stage I'd sort of gone, that's it. I'm giving this a go.
Did you like the lifestyle of, going out to gigs 7 nights a week?
Well, yeah, because I was doing that anyway. So I was getting paid to do what I, loved doing anyway. So it was a bonus.
Did you kind of see like a ladder up that you were aiming for at the time, like a way you could make a proper living out of it at that stage?
No, I don't know if I ever really thought about that. I just wanted to get better. I wanted to get more work. I wanted to learn more, which I figured, I guess, would lead on to other things. But yeah, it was very much head down learning and trying to pick up as much as I possibly could. Not that I'm not still doing that, but but back then, I really was, very, very green and very, very tentative, and but there were a lot of people around doing it, so it was a great community.
So what was the next step up after that?
Well, the Bluegrassy Knoll got offered work overseas, so they got invited to play Edinburgh Festival at the Assembly Rooms in the main room, which was brilliant. So they started trying to organise tours and that. So we went over there. I think it was through, if I get this right, we did the Assembly Rooms, and that's a great showcase as well because other people see you and, other bookers. So they got this Canadian booker. So then they started getting overseas gigs, basically, and tours. And because they were doing the Buster Keaton show, she specialised in children's entertainment. So we did a lot of children's festivals because it was showing kids about silent films, and you didn't need the Hollywood of today to enjoy a film. And we did shows in Korea, so there was showing people that it didn't matter about language either. So you'd have those intertitles, and there weren't that many of them, so in places like Korea they'd have translations for those. But other than that, the kids' responses were exactly the same all around the world. It was fantastic.
Had you been overseas much before then?
No, I hadn't. That was my first trip overseas, was with them. Because I'd gone straight into town planning and working. I just didn't stop. I did uni, I did town planning, and then went into sound, and I never really had holidays or had breaks.
I can't imagine having the first time you go overseas be like a work thing, and when you're moving around so often. Did you feel like you actually got a chance to soak up much of...
Yeah, because being with those guys, they're the nicest guys to tour with as well, and they're so much fun. They're so lovely and such great musicians, but it was such a treat for them as well. So even though it was working, it was very much about sightseeing as well. And if we went to, I know we had some shows in Ireland, so we'd tag on an extra week and we'd travel around together, and see the sights, or we were in America once and we had a week off in between shows and we were down in Florida. So we didn't go our different ways. We all stayed together and just, hired houseboats and hung out together and went and saw the sights together. It was great.
Did you stay in Europe at one point? Is that where you met Adele?
Oh, well, basically I went on tour with the Bluegrassy Knoll, and I did that thing where you meet someone overseas and then you sort of move over to be with them. But also the Bluegrassy Knoll were touring a lot in overseas, so it sort of fitted in with that. So I moved over to England and started working in sound over there and getting, working for PA companies. And I had actually previously met Adele in Melbourne when she played with Dave Graney. My friend Leanne used to mix them. She could mix them one night. I mixed them. And so I met her briefly on that. And then a friend of mine who I'd met working at the South Bank Centre, because I used to do a lot of work at the South Bank Centre in London. The South Bank Centre, they also worked at the Barbican, did some PA stuff there. So I was working all those really nice places on amazing shows. And my friend was a tour manager for a company that did sort of world and folk music. And for some reason he had tour managed the Go-Betweens on their last tour, and he was telling me at this show, oh yeah, I'm doing this Go-Betweens tour coming up. And I was like, it was about probably the only time I did self-promotion. I just went, do you need a front house sound engineer? Because I love the Go-Betweens, and I'd love to do it. And I've met Adele. And he went, oh, okay, I don't think we've got anyone yet. Oh, I'll speak to them. And so that was kind of how I got the Go-Betweens European tours. And
had you always been a fan?
I think I'd missed them sort of early on and caught them at the tail end. So I remember Cattle and Cane, Spring Rain, that coming out and just loving it. But I didn't really know them fully, the full albums. And I'd started buying the albums when they got back together again, and I was really into them then, and I'd sort of gone through their back catalogue then. So when the opportunity came to mix them, it was just too good to be true, because I could hear them in my head, how I wanted them to sound, how I thought they sounded. So it was, and you're just working for legends.
And what were they like to tour with?
Wonderful, really, really wonderful. Robert and Grant were lovely. Adele and Glenn, absolutely lovely. It was almost like touring with the Bluegrassy Knoll again. It was very in that everyone got along together, and a very Australian way of touring. Everyone's very responsible and just being able to look after themselves, if you know what I mean.
Is that an Australian thing?
I think so. I don't know. I would say yes, because when I went over to England, there seemed to be a lot of bands getting together and writing stuff in the studios and trying to release stuff. And even though there were bands playing around, there didn't seem to be as much of that culture of getting out and playing live and learning your chops on the circuit, so to speak. The music industry in Melbourne that I went through was very supportive. There were other musicians going to see other bands play all the time. Everyone's playing in everyone else's band. Everyone was learning and practicing and playing out in the open in front of everyone else, and DIY tours as well. So you just had to get yourself around. The Bluegrassy Knoll were very good at that sort of thing. Gus, who was their banjo player, was also their manager, was very good at writing applications for grants. So there was that side of it. So they're very self-sufficient, and yeah, I'd say that most Australian bands would have to be self-sufficient to do what they're doing, as you would know. And so I'm not saying that wasn't the case overseas, but I didn't see that culture as much.
Interesting.
But I was also then working in, bigger theatres, so I wasn't on the smaller band scene as much anymore.
Right, okay, yeah. When you were mixing the Go-Betweens, like what are the things you need to remember, like the technical bits?
Now you're making me go back in my memory. Just anything for any band to make sure that the right parts are heard. And I remember with the Go-Betweens, I loved Adele's voice, and I just remember the backing vocals, even though it would have been Amanda and that on the older songs and everything, just remembering those parts and just the way those harmonies blended together with Grant and Robert, whoever was singing at the time, just being aware of who was playing acoustic guitar and what were the key, those key guitar runs, and who was playing that. Glenn was an absolutely fantastic drummer. He looked after himself in that. He was very easy, to put up in a mix. They were very good like that. They, it all sat together very well, but it was more about, I guess, my intimate knowledge of the songs made me focus on trying to bring what I heard in my head out the front for everyone else.
That makes a big difference, I think, when you see, like when in Brisbane, someone does have their own engineer, and if it's a band like with at least two guitarists who might each do lead breaks, and you can tell a difference between when it's just a house engineer and they just leave everything for the whole time, and like, maybe the lead person who's mostly playing rhythm takes a lead break, but you can't hear it at all. Yeah,
you can't expect someone to know that who doesn't know the music, and that's why people have their own engineers, and it does take time. But so, nowadays, well, not nowadays, but any time, if you were starting with a band, you'd listen to their back catalogue, you'd listen to what music, the CDs that they produce, because that's how their sound is. You talk to them, what do you want it to be like? Is there anything different you want live? And the go-betweens were very, very, fairly straightforward, but you got to know the intricacies of the voices and what microphones suited who, and and like I said, and who played what at what bit. And for me, it was like, getting Adele's vocals in there as well, to hear those lovely BVs that I heard in my mind, that I heard on the CDs.
To get technical, what microphones did suit each of their voices?
Oh, back then, I think I was pretty much at the whim of whatever was around. So I did try some nice dynamic, condenser mics on Robert and Grant. I think it was more when we did some radio stuff, and that sort of worked when it's sort of more intimate, but generally just you were just stuck with bog standard dynamic 58. You cannot go wrong with that microphone usually.
I heard a story that Nico Case was doing some studio recording for an album, and the engineer would bring in like a procession of these incredible $5,000 vintage microphones, and she had the cans on. She just wasn't happy. She wasn't getting a good take, and she said, "Look, do you just have a 58?"
Yeah,
because that's what I'm used to. That's what I work with every night on stage. And then she got like a great take in the next take as soon as she had a 58.
Yeah. That's what people have grown up using, and that is often the case, that they just want that. I mean, I think sometimes when so it is obviously an expense as well, if you're going to get your own microphone, and some people do that because they want it clean, they don't want to get other people's germs and that. But in general, if you're a little band, you go around using whatever's there.
That's something Adele's recently taught me, because she brings her own mic sock to band practice.
Yeah.
Because we're in a shared practice room.
Yeah.
It's like genius. I'm going to start doing that. That's a good idea. That's a very good idea.
I have alcohol wipes as well.
Oh, good idea.
But for example, with Weller, he was a big fan of the 58, and I think we were in America doing a radio show, and so we had to use what the Americans had, and they had this Tullyfunken M80, and me in front of house, we weren't allowed to touch anything on those American shows. You were there just to give advice and guidance and help. And so we were standing there listening to it, and we're both going, "Oh my goodness, that sounds awesome." It was so present and so forward in the mix. I mean, he's got a great voice anyway, and very solid. And so we went, let's try this live and see if he's okay with it. And so we did some shows very soon after, and got the American PA company to send some of the mics down, and we got him to try it. And it was great for out front, and it was great for me on stage, because Weller on stage was very loud. There was like up to 20 wedges, side fills. He wanted loads of his vocal blaring out, and he also played in 3 different positions on stage. So my job was quite tough on that. There's another steep learning curve for you. I was working for Paul Weller and was trying to get blood out of a stone almost, in terms of level. So in that way, that microphone helped. I was able to get a lot more gain, a lot more level before feedback with it, and he was happy with the sound of it. So we weren't sure whether he'd go with that, being a big advocate of 58s, but I think by that stage he'd grown to trust us. Both, front of house had worked with him for years, but, also me, and so he gave it a go and he was fine with that. So in those instances is where I'd go and select a microphone.
So did you go work for Paul Weller like straight after the Go-Betweens?
No. I think I did Go-Betweens in 2005. At which stage I was working for various PA companies and teching and working at the South Bank, doing whatever housework there. And I'd only kind of do front of house mixing for people like the Go-Betweens or those Australian connections who knew me as a front of house engineer. I tended to fall into doing monitors a lot because I'd done monitors at the Corner Hotel for my friend Paul, and it didn't frighten me. You know, a lot of people would go, "Oh, I'm not doing monitors," and I'm just like, I don't mind. You know, I liked that the band were happy on stage, and I got a lot of satisfaction out of them being comfortable.
So for people who might not know, so monitors is the speakers that the band actually hears that are playing at them.
Yes, the speakers that they hear, or the in-ear now, the in-ear monitors, the earphones that they use so that they can hear themselves play. So you have a separate console on the side of the stage and you get exactly the same microphones and as front of house does, and you are mixing purely for the band. So I sort of fell into that and tend to do a lot more monitor work for the PA companies in the UK, which is where, and I used to tech as a monitor tech. So that was how I got it, the Paul Weller stuff. That was a couple of years later, I think.
At what point did in-ear monitors become a big thing?
Probably around that era they were starting to come in. I mean, I didn't really start working with them with bands until I took on the editors in 2012, I think it was, because Paul was definitely didn't want to go near in-ears. So, but they were around when he was playing at that stage. But they were becoming more prevalent. Whereas now everything I do is in-ears.
Yeah.
You know, and if not, it's a mixture of in-ears and wedges. Where some people want to have wedges as well, or a mixture of players on stage.
Is it easier working just with in-ears as a monitor engineer?
Yes, in terms of real estate, there's you don't have all the amps, you don't have all the wedges to set up, all the cables to do with that. You don't have to worry about feedback so much. It's almost like doing front of house mixes, so to speak, or whatever people want. But the other side of that is because everything's wireless, then you're entering this world of the dark art of RF, so radio frequencies, because at the moment there's a lot. The use of wireless equipment is becoming more and more prevalent, but there's less and less spectrum to sit it in because there's mobile phone companies. Everyone's got mobile phones. They've got, gadgets that speak to their refrigerator. Everything's running on radio waves. So the governments are selling it off to the big corporations because they're getting money from the mobile phone companies or whatever to use that spectrum. So there's less and less space available for us to use wireless equipment. So that's becoming more difficult. So that technical side is becoming difficult with in-ears and handhelds and stuff like that. Also with handhelds, we've now got digital technology, which is making it easier. So you can sit a lot more frequencies closer together, whereas with in-ears, we haven't quite reached that yet because of latency issues. So we're stuck with the good but old analog, so to speak, systems.
I think I still am a bit of a Luddite still about anything that's wireless. Like I don't trust anything Bluetooth. I have Wi-Fi in my house, of course, but I won't use a wireless mouse or a wireless printer. It's all got it just seems like more things to go wrong at this stage.
It is, and it is a bit full on, which is why I have got a tech who deals with that now, because before that, as a monitor engineer, you find you have to deal with wireless equipment and working out the frequencies and, spacing and everything. There are programs to deal with all that, but, because the math is so incredible, I wouldn't understand it whatsoever. But you do have to have some sort of understanding of it because things can go very, very wrong very quickly with it. But the bigger the gigs, the more you have a specialist who deals with that because it's a make or break with it,
But so the editors were more amenable to the new technology?
Editors were already using in-ears by the stage I came on with them. I started filling in for a friend and then they asked me to work on their next album run, so I did that with them. And they were fantastic live band and really nice guys, and a joy to mix in ears for. Tom's voice is fantastic. It's absolutely incredible. So that was very enjoyable in terms of that. But yeah, they were all in ears. I think the old guitarist Chris had some wedges on stage, but he then left, so it all went to in ears.
Have you worked for any pricks? It seems like everyone you work with is lovely and fantastic to tour with.
Well,
you have to name names if you don't want. But.
Sometimes it's not the artists, sometimes it's the people around them.
Sure.
So there have been a few horrible situations, I must say, where I've actually walked and quit the job because it's been unpleasant, because there's no need for that. But in general, I think I've been very lucky. I've worked for people who have really enjoyed playing and all just really good musicians, really interesting music. And I've just counted myself so lucky that I've had that opportunity, because it makes it so much more fascinating to work for. Not saying that, I haven't worked for a massive big pop artist. I can't imagine doing that because I'm not into that sort of music.
Some would argue that Marina and the Diamonds and Florence and the Machine are pretty big pop artists.
Well, they are, but you look at them, they come from indie world,
They do.
Marina's got that quirkiness about her, which I really liked, and she was fantastic to work for. She was so professional and just so down to earth. Lovely, really lovely. I can't speak highly enough of her. And Florence, again, incredible and just so into what she's doing. That's not an act you see up there. That's her. And I love that. I love working for people who are like that. And Weller was like that. He loved playing live. And he could be very impatient on stage and very demanding, but the gig was over. He might give you the look of death during the show, but when the gig was over, he's like, I understand, Annette, there were issues with this, that's fine. He was great. So, yes, I have worked for a lot of lovely people.
Would you ever, make that step up? I guess you're right, there is another tier of pop above where, in Brisbane, Florence was at the River Stage, right?
Yes.
And that's what, 10,000 crowd or something?
Yeah.
So I guess there is another tier of, when Taylor Swift comes to town and plays a stadium of tens of thousands of people.
I've teched a Taylor Swift tour.
You have?
Yes. So, yes, I've seen that sort of firsthand. And again, she was fantastic. She was lovely. She was one of those performers who, good musician, really into what she's doing. There's no falseness there. So I was really impressed with that.
I guess, technically, though, that's another order of magnitude of complexity on stage, with dancers and fireworks potentially.
Yeah.
So what was your role on the Taylor Swift tour?
Well, I was basically the monitor tech for their monitor engineer. Now, they are doing what I'm doing. They toured with a stage tech, RF tech, to look after them. So I kind of helped tip their desk, and then they became pretty much self-sufficient. Their stage tech went off and set up all the stage stuff, and I would go and help the guys fly the PA, and then I didn't have a huge role in it as a result. I just sort of filled in wherever I could.
What era was this of Taylor Swift? Because she's gone through a few different sort of band setups, I think.
Was 2007 maybe, which was that song she wrote, which I really love, called Mean, when she's playing banjo.
Oh, so she was then sort of her country.
Yeah, she was
phase.
It was, obviously her stuff was still poppy, but she just released that, and was that surmised about the Kanye incident possibly? There was implications of that, but whether it was or not, but it was a fantastic song, and she'd get up there in soundcheck. I don't think I saw her live, but play it, but soundcheck, they'd rehearse that song. I was like, that's fantastic, and she'd be playing banjo on it. And so it was that era, and it was in the UK. That was her first big tour over there. So we did arenas, and we didn't do that many, but it was before she went. She was huge in America, but she hadn't gone as huge in the UK.
By sort of, I guess, the end of the noughties, you were pretty much set for work. Work was coming at a steady rate, and you could.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty much I worked for Weller up until 2012, from 2007 to 2012. So I spent my priority was him. And in between that, I'd work for PA companies or a few other bands if they needed. I'd do, regular shows with the PA company, like I always did Cambridge Folk Festival, which I loved, or the Folk Awards, BBC Two Folk Awards. So it was nice doing that because that was where I'd sort of come from with the Bluegrassy Knoll in Australia. And I used to, do Woodford. Woodford with Bluegrassy Knoll. I started working for Woodford on one of the stages and things like that. I'd do Port Fairy Folk Festival for certain companies, Apollo Bay Festival. So I really like that style of music and festival. I really love a folk festival. Everyone's chilled and lovely. and it's so different. Everything is so different from act to act.
Working on gigs and not in a regular 9 to 5, like, is that a lifestyle that you took to?
It took a while to get used to it, and I like it because if anything I verge on workaholic. So that suits that. But the touring and living out of a suitcase took a long time to adjust to. And I don't like it particularly. I like touring. I like seeing different places. I like meeting loads of different people or coming across people that you've met somewhere on the other side of the world and you see them a few years later. It's lovely for that. And, and I find festival season fantastic because you're just meeting up with these old acquaintances constantly, and it's really nice. But you don't have much of a life outside of that. It's not like you finish work for the day and you've got the evening off. You roll out of the bus, you might go in at 10 a.m. and you're kind of in work mode until the gig finishes, whenever that is. If you're doing your own shows, it might be 1 a.m. or something by the time the trucks are loaded or whatever. So you don't really have evening downtime, so to speak.
When you are like off work, when you're between jobs or something,
Yeah.
do you have a hard time just chilling out and relaxing?
Oh, yes. It's very hard to come back down from that. And often, as I find as I get older, I need a bit more rest. So I might have a couple of days where I literally don't move. I might just watch telly and box sets for a few days because I just feel my body's just exhausted. And I wake up and I was like, where's my sheet that's telling me what to do every hour of a day? You're going, I have to start making decisions for myself again. I mean, I'm lucky in that, or unlucky as some people might think, I don't have the family, I don't have children. So there are guys who come off tour and they've got to go straight back into family life, and that would be very difficult,
Was that something you ever wanted?
No, not really. No. I don't know why, just never did.
Well, is exercise a big part of it? You rode your bike over here through the rain.
Yeah.
Is that like really important to?
Yes, I've always been into exercise and I've loved cycling. I was talking to someone about this recently. When I got into cycling, I think at the age of 17, I decided that I was going to buy a bike and I was going to use that as my main mode of transport to get everywhere and anywhere because I could. And it just gave me that freedom, even though I still had a car and everything. It was that freedom and I guess the endorphins you get from exercise. And what I found on tour is the way I get through it is exercise. So my day off, when I was on tour with Weller, and I had a really good friend on that who was also into cycling, and we'd take our bikes on tour, our day off would be find a cafe with really nice cake, ride a couple of hours to it, have cake, ride back again, and sightsee at the same time. So it would be like having a nice day out where you're doing something almost normal and you can forget what it is you do. And so the next day you come back and you're a lot more refreshed rather than just maybe, getting off the bus, going to the pub or something like that.
Is that common like in bands and crew on the road? Do a lot of people try and get that kind of regular exercise in, or is it a lot of?
Yeah, I think maybe more so now. People are a bit more aware of it, but not completely. No.
Is there a lot of partying on the road, like in the bands you've?
Depends who it is and who you're with, who the crew are, what the band are like. I mean, yes and no. I have certainly done my share of it, and I can't possibly do it anymore.
Who kind of sets the tone for that? Like if it's like Weller, like will it be if he? I don't know if he's still a party guy or not, but like if he isn't, will the band and the crew still go out?
I think that's probably a good example of it, because he was a big, he's a big party drinking tour, and I think I came in the tail end of it. So the crew did so as well, because there was always alcohol around, and that's the thing with the tours like that. There's always alcohol. There's always a rider. There's always your tour bus stocked with alcohol. So you fall into that trap of drinking when you don't really want to, and obviously if you're disciplined you can do that, but a lot of us aren't, and I certainly wasn't, and it wasn't good for me. But I found with Weller, he stopped drinking, and the crew were getting older. His core crew were getting older, so they also stopped drinking as it was. I'd stopped drinking as well by then.
Were they kind of following his example?
I think...
like if the boss man's not going out.
I think that definitely has an impact on it. Yeah, some of the younger band, his band were younger, they still carried on, but maybe it was a bit more controlled. Or, they'd have big blowouts, as people do. They'd have fun. And, some of the crew still did. But it became a lot more, in a way they did follow. But also, I'd stopped drinking before Paul had. It was just a decision I made, and other people made that decision as well. And I think it became easier for people who were in the two minds about what they were doing if the boss was stopped, It became a bit more controlled, a bit more accountable.
What is like the crew's relationship with the artists on these big tours? Like if you're back in the States, like would you call Paul to hang out or something?
No, not at all. For my job as monitors, I am dealing directly with them. They've got to be able to demand stuff off me, and with Paul particularly, it's in the heat of the gig, so you can come across as possibly seeing him quite rude about it, and you can get angry if things aren't going right. So you have to keep a professional distance, and I've always done that, always tried to do that, because they're my boss, they're paying my wage, they're not my best buddy, so you've got to show them that respect. So whether people do that or not, that's their own choice, but generally that's the way it would be.
I forgot to ask about your drumming. At what point did you start drumming?
Oh, my very short foray into drumming, probably around the time I started working at Punters Club. Oh, at the tail end of town planning, because I started going to have lessons with this woman teacher up in Belgrave, up in the Dandenong Ranges, and I started seeing her. I was living with John Edwards from the Toxic Garden Gnomes from Brisbane. He'd moved down with his partner, and they'd had a room for rent, so I was living with them. So even though I was living in the house with the drummer, I was too shy to ask for assistance there, so I decided I needed to go elsewhere to learn. So I was learning through her, and then I started playing drums just with some friends in Melbourne. My drum kit was given to me by my friend Cameron Earl, who's a Brisbane drummer, played with the Bam Bams, Chrysalids, Aloha Pussycats. It's probably my oldest friend from that era. So I was just doing that while I was at the Punters Club and doing Form Guide. And I think I played in a couple of little bands, but I was also starting, by that stage I started to mix as well, and I just found that I was getting more mixing work, and I probably wasn't as devoted to drumming as what I thought I might be. Right. And it was fun. I think I played for a few short times with Laura McFarlane from 99, and so played with a few different people, and it was good fun, but nothing ever came of it, and I think I just stopped doing it one day. I don't remember making that conscious decision. But
is making music something you'd ever want to go back and try?
No, not necessarily. I think so many other people are much better at it. I like listening to it, and I don't know, the satisfaction I get from a live gig and helping that happen is incredible. I really enjoy that. Like, I've never thought about going into studio stuff because I probably don't have the patience for it. It's the live sphere that I love. It's that immediacy. It's, you know, it's the audience. It's everything. It's seeing someone on stage having a great gig.
Do you ever see yourself doing anything else?
Not especially. I have dreams of random stuff I'd like to do, but
Like what?
strangely enough, I'd love to be a bamboo farmer. You know, so it's something to do with sustainable agriculture in a way, you know, the use of materials that can be recycled and reused for other stuff, you know, just in that helping the environment kind of way. And that kind of probably stems from my town planning days as well, and the type of planning that I'd got into with the Fraser Island Inquiry, helping with the Sherbrooke Shire town plan, that sort of more conservation, environmental bent.
In these like big production things, like do you see a lot of waste happen as well? You know, with riders and food.
Oh yeah, there's a lot, but a lot of artists are becoming more aware of it. I mean, with Florence, she's trying to have a zero plastic bottle policy. And they're taking it, they're trying to take it as far as they can. Now, it all has cost implications, which production deal with. And, you know, our production, who also looked after Red Hot Chili Peppers, they're used to big tours and they're used to working that sort of thing out. So they know what will and won't work. And at the moment, so they got a whole bunch of water bottles and sort of insulated mugs done for the whole crew and for all of them. So the band's water bottles on stage are these same Florence the Machine printed bottles that get filled up with water by the assistants and get put out every day for rehearsals and the show and get collected at night. So there is the attempt to do that, you know, and, you know, we've all got the coffee cups so we can have tea and coffee in the same cup. They provide make sure there's water filters backstage so we can refill our water bottles. So that's the first tour I've been on that we've done that. So that's fantastic.
How did you get on the Florence and the Machine tour?
I got a phone call. Management wanted a female monitor engineer, and I was recommended by a couple of people. So I got it that way. I was doing Goldfrapp at that stage. I'd done Goldfrapp, Spiritualized, Editors, Weller. So, you know, people knew of me and the companies we worked for with those bands. Also, as it turns out, the musical director for Florence was the old guitarist for Goldfrapp, so I'd worked with him previously.
Oh, Will Gregory?
No. So Will is the... he's the other half of Goldfrapp with Alison Goldfrapp,
yeah.
But Alex Lee was playing guitar for them when I joined the Goldfrapp camp. And he, very good musician, lovely guy to work for. He'd taken over, he got offered the job as musical director for Florence on the album previous to the one that I'm on, working with her for. So I'd sort of run into him at like the Coachella gigs and that. I was out with Marina and Diamonds. Florence was doing her album tour at that time. And so I'd run into Alex again then. But I don't think it was through him that I got it. It was literally production asking UK people they knew about a female monitor engineer. So I, you know, part of me got my hackles up going, what does it matter what gender I am? But, you know, it's what they wanted. But obviously I had to be experienced as well. So
that's an interesting idea of a band having a musical director.
Yeah.
But I guess, you know, in a 9-piece band, someone has to...
I think, yeah. You'll find most of the bands like that particularly have a musical director. What's different for them was having a musical director who didn't play in the band, which Alex didn't.
Oh.
So he was external to it. So he would help translate the album that, you know, that was being played at the time, plus the old songs. He'd help the musicians realise that, you know, and the arrangements of it, and it would get presented to, in rehearsals, it would get presented to Florence and she'd go, oh, that sounds great, or she'd have some ideas about things to change. And, yeah, it's having almost like, having an orchestra leader in a way.
Or like on a film, having like the director, I guess, would be the front person.
Yeah.
And then the second AD, is that the person who actually goes around and tells everyone what to do, I think?
I don't know with the film, yeah. But yeah, it worked well for that. And so, but on the road, when Alex, so Alex got it up and running and came on tour with us for the first run of shows and a lot of promo stuff we did. And now the sort of duties seem to fall between the guitarist and the harp player, who've been with Florence since the beginning. So they know her, they know her mindset, they know the music inside out. So so the guitarist will direct it and call, in sound check, go, who wants to play this and who wants to do this? What we need to work on this.
I was going to ask about the harp. If she, I think I've asked before if she still plays with a harp player. So is it difficult to get the right sound for a harp on stage?
Well, it's the big soundboard with strings. So apparently there are people now making proper pickups for harps, but it's very bespoke. I think the front house guy met someone who does that, and we were wondering about it. But Tom himself has just developed a system where he's got these 2 AKG bug mics, which just stick on the inside of the soundboard from the back, because it's hollowed out at the back. So, and it works. Okay, you get obviously you're going to get spill from around it, but because there's no monitors on stage, it's all in ears. You've only, and the guitar aren't that loud. The drums aren't super loud, and there's a lot of space on stage. You don't have as much bleed going into them as you might have, like if you were a small band doing it in a small room.
When you were working with Goldfrapp, what was the stage setup like?
The first time I worked with Goldfrapp, it was keyboard player, bass player, drums. He looked after all the tracks and everything, as a lot of the drummers do, and violin, guitar.
Does Will Gregory actually play live with Goldfrapp?
No, very rarely. I think he used to a long time ago, but I remember seeing them come through the South Bank and Will being out front and basically with the sound engineer going, this is how I want it to sound. So Will was there in rehearsals in the way that Alex was with the Florence, going, this is how the songs are to be sounding, because, he's recorded them, arranged them, So he was there with us in rehearsals, getting with the band, helping them realise them. So in the second time around with Goldfrapp, it was very basic. We had 2 keyboard players, bass and drums, and the track.
What's Alison Goldfrapp's voice like to work with? Because it's not a belty voice the way that Florence is.
No, it's a little bit difficult in that essence. She's very soft and whispery, but obviously she can sing, but she's very quiet. So there's a lot of spill from around her. And so if you're in a room or a venue where there's lots of reflections coming back, it can be a bit difficult. So a lot of that was trying to reduce all that sort of ambient sound around her to her.
How do you do that?
Oh, you don't very well. I might find that if I might have to EQ out some frequencies that were coming back in certain instances. It's only a few times I had to do that. I mean, also she'd want to hear her voice in a certain way. So yeah, it's all to do with EQ, trying not to really do any compression on it, because she's singing, she needs to be able to hear her dynamics, so I don't really want to be doing that. So I might do it with a little bit of dynamic EQ. Also, you might be resorting to saying to the drummer, could you play a little bit softer on the cymbals, which front of house and myself would both ask, because obviously the front of house is having the same issues that I am having, trying to get her voice out front.
In what circumstances would you do the thing where you block off the drum kit with like perspex or whatever?
In situations like that, but whether it's wanted or not. But I remember I was on tour with Blondie, and they did that because Debbie Harry didn't want to hear anything on stage. She really, all the amps were out back in ISO cabs, and there was nothing on stage. It was quiet. So the only thing that she'd be hearing was PA. So she had in-ears, her monitor engineer was looking after. And the drum kit had perspex all the way around it. But also in orchestras, when you're doing orchestral shows where there's a band involved, they will perspex off the drums.
So
for the string players.
When were you working with Blondie?
That was, again, a teching tour, so I was monitor tech. That would have been in the mid-2000s.
That's an interesting concept. So all the amps were like off stage in little cabinets, and they were just getting it all in there?
Same.
Wow.
Editors did it. Tom did it with his cabinet, and I don't know who started it, but yeah, his cabinet used to live out the back, in the back room, wherever, with really long cables going to it, and in a box which had mics mounted into it, so we just had to plug XLRs into it. But yeah, Blondie was all that. It's a concept where you just get a really clean stage, so you get a very clean front of house sound.
Did they still, though, have like amps on stage for show, like big Marshall stacks or something?
I can't even remember if they did. They probably did, but that was so long ago. Yeah.
Because you have to have something on stage.
Yeah, you would have to have something, I'm sure. But I know, well, editors, Tom didn't. Well, he had his piano that he'd go and play, so his space was taken up with that. And the other guitarists had their, guitar and bass amp was still on stage. But Blondie, I can't remember. There probably was something on stage for show.
And Debbie Harriet, what's it like doing sound with her?
Well, I didn't do sound with her. I was teching.
Yeah.
But I think they found it difficult because she was very, I don't know whether it was tinnitus or she was just being very sensitive to sound. So she really didn't want to hear anything. She hated it if any of the PA had to be ground stacked, so on the stage near her. She really hated that.
Right.
At that time, I don't know, she might be different now, but it was really about having as quiet as possible around her.
So you've got a month off now after
Yes.
the Australian leg of the Florence tour. Where are you going after this?
With the Florence tour, you mean? So Europe for a month. So we'll do not UK, as in sort of continent Europe. So we'll do shows there. Then we've got, I think, another month off. Then we head over to America for a North American tour. And then that sort of blends into the start of festival season. So I looked at the dates, and we've got, European and American festivals. So a lot of toing and throwing. What else have got? Possibly some Mexico shows.
South America?
I don't know. Possibly.
They got some big festivals down there, don't they?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen it. All that sort of stuff is coming in.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just get blocks, of work written in that might just say North America or South America or Mexico or something like that. We haven't got specific. We're starting to get specific dates, and the festivals. I think we know most of the festivals now, but there's still a few gaps, so who knows what could turn up.
So are you are you under contract to the band, or is it like how are you just sort of indefinitely there?
I basically got approached saying, do you want to come and work for Florence and the Machine? We've got 18 months work, so we need you to be around for that. And this is what we'll pay you, blah, blah, blah. And I went, okay, lovely.
Would you tour indefinitely with one band, or do you like to keep it fresh?
I like to keep it fresh, and I don't think you can, even though you can kind of tour indefinitely with a band, if they're going off and writing albums, they're never going to be able to tour all the time, unless you're working for an act that's not doing that. Then it's just constantly playing. I don't know. I like the variety. So in my downtime, if I can go and do other work, I will do, because it's nice to see people that I haven't seen for ages, and it's nice to keep your hand in doing other stuff.
And in your downtime, where is home at the moment?
At the moment, oh my goodness, I have so many homes at the moment. I have bought a house in Manchester, so that's kind of my home at the moment. But I'm also living in Melbourne when I can, and with the idea of moving back to Australia permanently if I can do it. So sort of I'm living out of a suitcase no matter where I am, it seems.
Are there any acts still touring that would be like your dream gig? I
don't know. I love people like the National. That would be awesome. But I've met their engineers. They're so lovely. So I don't know. I must say, I really find myself missing the Weller days, even though it was very stressful and very difficult because it was such an intense experience on stage. But someone like that, I've got so much respect for his outlook of music. I mean, he used to, when we were on tour, I remember seeing him come back from a record shop and he's buying all these CDs of local bands or new artists, and he was always listening to music, and his interest in that I found really interesting, that he was always looking for something new and up for anything, music-wise.
Do you try and do that too?
No, not as much as I'd like. I used to, but I also find... I've been wondering about this. I used to listen to music a lot more, and I try and find new stuff, and I find working on the festivals is good for that. Like if I can catch something early on, or if I try and listen to, when I've got downtime, I'll listen to BBC Six in the UK, or if I'm in Australia, I'll be listening to Triple R or PBS or Triple Z up in Brisbane. I try and do that. But when I'm on tour, I find that going back to my hotel room and listening to music on a computer is very unsatisfying.
Right.
So I've just finally bought myself a little UE portable speaker in the hope that will help, because I find that I'll buy, I download a new album and then I'll start playing it. I go, I can't listen to it like this. This is horrible. And I don't want to wear headphones or earphones because I wear that all day for work, and it's just annoying. I want that freedom. I want that break from it. So, so I've finally bought myself a little portable speaker, which people have been carrying for years, and in the hope that will make me enjoy it again.
Is it also hard to go from working in, huge theatres and stadiums and stuff to go, like we met at a gig at a bowls club recently. Is it hard to go to a little venue with a tiny dinky little PA and listen to that?
Yes and no. No, because that's what I grew up doing, and that's what I love. I love about live music is people getting up there and giving it a go, and I love the intimacy of that. And so being able to be that close to a stage and seeing someone play, I find exciting. I love that. I love that sort of gig, I wouldn't choose to go and see someone at a stadium. That's not the environment that I like. Though having said that, I did go and see Queen play, and that was brilliant.
Who was the singer?
Adam Lambert. So the tour manager from Goldfrapp, tour managers Queen, and they were in Melbourne when I was visiting, so I got tickets and went with some friends, and they sat us at front of house behind the mixing desk. So we were lucky we got that treatment, and I was blown away. It was an incredible show. I wasn't sure I'd like it in that setting, but they really put on a show, and I think that sort of half changed my mind about that type of thing. But if, as a choice, I'd go and see a band play in a little venue.
Do you wear earplugs when you go to see music?
Yes, I usually try and remember to do that. I didn't at the Bowls Club that time because I don't know. I think they're in my toolbox. But normally now I will always carry. I've got moulded earplugs.
Oh, nice.
That fit, so they attenuate evenly across all frequencies, supposedly. So you can still hear everything. It's not like wearing foam earplugs where it gets a bit more muffled.
Yeah,
it's very clear wearing the moulded earplugs. So I will, if I'm going to see a band, I will take them.
Were they expensive?
Not in the scheme of things, no. Maybe £100 or something like that. They were well worth it.
Yeah. I have a feeling I should get some because, I just use Heroes, which are not as bad as foam ones made for sleeping on a plane, but I think I have very small ear canals. Yeah. And it can get quite uncomfortable after a while. And for some reason, my right ear canal is even more narrow than the left one.
That's just how it is.
It just pops out, depending on the shape.
It also, your ears are still growing, and they, I was told, or the recommendation is to get new moulds every 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So, I'm constantly getting new sets of in-ears, not only for considering what the band I'm working for is, and what they're using, but also because I need new ones. So I go back to an old set and I find they're not as comfortable anymore because my ears have changed shape. But the molded earplugs are usually made of soft silicon, so they're a lot more comfortable and a lot more forgiving than the harder in-ear earphones that we use. But yeah, if you're concerned about your hearing, then they're well worth it. Because I do find now that if I do go and see bands and I don't have them, I'll be like, oh, this is a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, and when you try and go to sleep, there's going to be some ringing. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I should admitting this, but I think my whole career with Weller, I did monitors with the attenuated earplugs in, because here I am with this really, really loud stage. I've got a listen wedge next to me, which is where I hear what each of their mixes are through. So I've got to run that at a certain level to be able to hear it. And as a monitor, you're forcing yourself to listen. It's not like you can shut off. And so I'm forcing my ears to constantly be listening the whole gig. And the only way I could deal with those levels was where the attenuated earplugs. Otherwise, my brain would have exploded. I think I did the first gig without them, and I went to bed that night, and it felt like someone had been punching me in the head in my ear. It was that painful, and I just thought never again. And yeah. So, I mean, I'd set up without them in, and when it came to the gig, I'd put them in. I could still hear everything. You can hear feedback. It's not a problem.
Do you get your hearing tested often?
No, I've just been thinking about doing that. But no, I don't get my hearing tested. I've just tried to be careful with it over the years.
Have you had much opportunity to sort of be a mentor to younger engineers in the way that people sort of helped you when you were younger?
I think that's kind of just starting for me at the moment. I think when I met you was at that Girls Rock benefit, and my friend Lisa, I love her dearly, but basically thrust me in front of Ash, who was running Girls Rock Brisbane, and said, Annette can do a sound workshop for you. and I went, okay. And then Ash was telling me about the dates, and I said, oh, I'll be in Melbourne then. And Lisa's like, use your points. You can come up and use your points to get a flight up. And I went, okay, you're right. I could do that. I should give back. So, and also just prior to that, I think I mentioned to you an organisation called Sound Girls, an American group, which was started by Carrie Keyes, who was the monitor engineer for Pearl Jam and Red Hot Chili Peppers. And another woman, Michelle, I can't remember her surname, but the front of house engineer, Brad Maddox, who I'm working with at the moment, he knew Michelle. She'd taken over one of his gigs. Anyone can be a member of Sound Girls, doesn't matter if you're male or female. And I joined them years ago, and they, there's blogs, there's online information, there's notices about jobs and everything. And he sort of pointed out to me, he said, Sound Girls are offering shadowing opportunities. A friend of his, Willie Nelson's engineer, was offering shadowing opportunities. And he said, basically, the girls write in, send their CV, say, we'd like to follow this person on this gig for this reason. It's not just about turning up and getting free tickets to a gig. It's someone who's keen to do it. And he said, do you want to offer that for Florence and the Machine? And so we offered that through Sound Girls. So we've done a few of those in the UK. Production were like, absolutely, Florence is well up for supporting something like that for women. They said, bring them in for the day. We'll feed them. They can stay and see the show, whatever they need. So we're going to be doing some more of that in Europe, in North America, offering shadowing opportunities. And if I can work again with Girls Rock, so I did that sound workshop. Oh, that was so difficult.
Was it?
It was nerve-wracking. I'm not a get up in front of people and speak kind of person. It took me ages in my career to be comfortable going out in front of thousands of people shouting down a microphone to test it. Gradually it doesn't bother me now, but it took a long time to do that comfortably. And so yes, I found that very hard talking to groups of people.
Was it especially because they were kids?
No, it's just because I feel very exposed and yeah, you start questioning, what am I talking about? Do I know what I'm talking about?
I think you know what you're talking about by this stage.
Yeah, I know, but it's still, it's one of those, it's just a personality trait, it's always questioning yourself, So, and the same thing when we offered the shadowing opportunities for Florence, I was like, what am I going to tell them? What am they going to learn from me? And it's just a matter of getting used to that. But
and how were they?
They were great. So one of the girls who came, so basically there was Brad and I, we said, well, we can take 2 people. And so even we showed them everything, how we set up on stage. And so one of them went out front with Brad, and one of them, she was more interested in learning about monitors and setting up stage and doing what I'd done. And so she stayed with me, and I gave her a pack during the show so she could listen to what I was doing during the show. And that was great, and just explaining to her. She was just full of questions. She was slightly older, had come into it at an older age, which I had as well. So we had a few things in common like that. So that went well, and I basically was recommending people to get in touch with. As it turns out, she's emailed me and gone, I've got an interview with this company you recommended. I suggested a few things to point out to them, and she said, I've been given the job.
Oh, that's great.
It was so satisfying, to hear that she'd sort of pushed herself through a bit of self-doubt and approached people, and it had such a positive result so quickly as well. Because, I knocked on so many doors so many times, and I still do. You still go through that point as a freelancer where you have quiet periods and you go, am I ever going to work again? Do people know? Have I done something wrong? So, yeah, that was really nice to hear.
If you did ever come back to Australia to settle down and maybe move away from being on big touring acts, would you consider teaching at a place like, SAE or GMC?
Yes, definitely. I would love to. And I've already had, I've been exploring work when I'm back here. And I came back here for 3 months, not knowing I'd be gone in 3 months, thinking I'd be there longer. So I work for a few PA companies. A friend of a friend who teaches at RMIT said we need people to supervise in the studio, not teaching yet, but I was like, yeah, I'll be up for doing stuff like that, anything, because as far as I'm concerned, being up for anything or all those different situations, you never know who you're going to meet, you never know what you're going to learn, what situation it's going to lead on to, because for me there's always been a knock-on of people you meet, people you know, or things you're willing to do. If you're willing to give something a go, then anything can happen. And I find that exciting. So no, I don't have any plans because I also want to keep my options open.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, thank you for talking to me today, Annette.
That's all right. Thank you, Scott, for having me here and for the tea.
If you want to find out more about some of those organisations that Annette mentioned, you can go to soundgirls.org, which is mostly a North American organisation, but there is a chapter in Melbourne that you can look up. And Girls Rock, which is an Australia-wide organisation, also with a Brisbane chapter. So that's at girlsrockaustralia.com.au or girlsrockbne.com for the Brisbane one. Corrections for this episode, just the one. So I asked if a band's musical director would be analogous to a second assistant director on a film set. The answer is not really. So second ADs have a very specific role in the film industry, and no, they are not just a second-rate level of assistant. So the director, the big shot who gets all the glory, works mostly with the actors. The first assistant director is responsible for the overall logistics of the shoot, especially making sure that the shooting schedule is adhered to. So then the director gives instructions to the first AD and they make it happen. And the first AD is also the one who usually calls action. The second AD supports the role of the first AD by keeping everything outside the immediate filming area running smoothly. So this could mean making sure the actors are getting their hair and makeup done on time, or keeping an eye on when craft services need more donuts. So what would be the equivalent of a musical director who's not in the band? I don't know, maybe a dialogue coach? Who knows? Someone who works in film, please email me, gimmeempathypodcast@gmail.com. Do correct me if you have corrections to make. Also at Gimme Empathy Podcasts on Instagram, Facebook. You can look us up there. What else can I say? Thanks to everyone who came out to see any of the gigs I was in last weekend with We All Want To and Harley Young and the Haymakers. They were really cool. gigs are funny. Like when you're launching something, especially because I was playing in both bands on every night, I feel like I didn't get a chance to chat to people as much as I should have. So sorry if I didn't get a chance to talk to you much or at all. I do appreciate people coming out. And hey, I've got another thing coming up. If you want to see me play with past guests Adele Pigvance and Nash Shanahan, we have a gig on Saturday the 30th of March in South Brisbane at the Milk Factory. We're playing with A Country Practice and a new band called Full Power Happy Hour, and they are fronted by none other than Alex Campbell from episode 24. It's a new project of hers. It's quite different to the punk of Bad Bangers and Gunk, so come along to see that. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you on the flippy flop. Until next time, stay fuzzy. Stay fuzzy.